Zegt the Yomא, Perek Zayin, Mishnah Aleph. Balei Kohen Gadol Likros. This parak concludes the description of the Kohen Gadol's avodah in Yom Kippur. The first Mishnah teaches that after the Yisrael Azazel went to the wilderness, the Kohen Gadol would read a parsha from the Torah. So when the Kohen Gadol went from the main chassid to the Ezras Nashon to read from the Torah, and Ratzah Likros Bevigdei Butz Kairei, if he wanted to read when still dressed in the white linen garments of the avodah of Yom Kippur, he may read while dressed in those garments. The Kriyas HaTorah on Yom Kippur is not an avodah. Although it's also to use the Bigdei Kahuna for an activity that's not an avodah, the Bigdei Kahuna were an exception to this rule. The Kohanim were allowed to wear their begadim even when not doing avodah. It's machlekes in the Gemara, but this is what we paskin. Therefore, if he chose to do so, the Kohen Gadol wore the Bigdei Lavan when he leaned from the Sefer Torah. If he didn't want to read in the Bigdei Lavan, he may read it in his own white robe. Sounds like that's the only option. So why would he wear a white robe? Since laning is not an avodah, the Kohen Gadol may wear his personal clothing. In truth, he may wear any garment that he wants, but the Mishnah says he wore a white robe because it was the practice of distinguished people to wear white clothing on Yom Kippur, as in Mizman Hazeh, we wear a kittel, and some people wear a kittel even on Rosh Hashanah, wear it on Pesach, a chassid wears it by the chuppah. It's a beged of chashivos, it's a beged of malchus, and he would wear that for the Kriyas HaTorah on Yom Kippur. Chazan HaKnesses Netel Sefer Torah v'Nesel Rosh HaKnesses, the attendant of the Knesses, which is the person who was in charge of the shul, and this is talking about in the Beis HaMikdash, he took the Sefer Torah and gave it to the Rosh HaKnesses, the one who was in charge of the shul. The one who was in charge of the shul made all the decisions related to the shul and all the avodas in the shul, such as who lanes and who reads the Haftarah and who's the Shliach Tzibur. The lashon of the rabbis al piv nechtachim kol tzorchei haknesses mi maftir mi arvel fnei hateva v'nesen fine. V'haskan neisel kain gadol v'reish haknesses neisel haskan. The head of the shul, the knesses, gives it to the assistant Kohen Gadol, v'askan neisel Kohen Gadol, the assistant Kohen Gadol gives it to the Kohen Gadol alein. The reason for having so many people pass the Sefer Torah is to honor the Kohen Gadol by showing that there are many ranks beneath him, and every one of them wants to hold on to the Sefer Torah. Now we find this by bris also. A lot of times we pass the baby around to give everyone a chance to get involved in the mitzvah. The Kohen Gadol oimid and makabel v'karei oimid. The Kohen Gadol stood. The Kohen Gadol rose when the Sgan Kohen Gadol brought the Sefer Torah to him, in keeping with the halacha that one must stand when he sees the Sefer Torah being carried. The Mishnah implies that the Kohen Gadol was sitting until this point. Since he didn't begin to read from the Torah until the Azazel reached the Midbar, which took a long time, he sat in order to have koyach. The fact that the Kohen Gadol sat shows that the Kriyas HaTorah took place in the Ezras Nashon, because sitting in the main Azara is forbidden. And after the Kohen Gadol got to Sefer Torah, he started learning from the Torah while standing. He reads the parsha that starts Achrei Mos, which teaches how the avodah of Yom Kippur is done in the Beis HaMikdash, ve'ach ba'asar, and the parsha that begins Ach ba'asar, which says the general halachos of Yom Kippur. One who reads from the Torah may skip to a different section that deals with a similar subject, as long as the tzibur is not forced to wait while he rolls the Sefer Torah to the desired place. In those times, the Balkaire would pause after each pasuk, meaning the times of the Mishnayos and the times of the Gemara, the Balkaire would pause after each pasuk, at which point there was a Meturgaman, and he would translate the pasuk into Aramaic, which was the commonly spoken language of the day. During the pause, it was possible for the Kohen Gadol to roll the Sefer Torah to the second parasha, since it was only a few parakim away, because the Achrei Mos chapter is Perek Tezvav. I'm sorry, is Perek Tezayin in Sefer Vayikra, and Ach Ba'asar is Perek of Gimel in Parashas Emor. Since the people didn't have to wait idly in the meantime for the because the Meturgaman was still speaking, so skipping to another passage was fine. He rolls the Sefer Torah closed and places it against his chest, holds it the way the way we hold the Sefer Torah. And he says, there's more written here in the Sefer Torah than what I've read before you. What does that mean? The Kohen Gadol reads the next parasha Palpeh. Therefore, to prevent people from thinking that the passage was missing from the Sefer Torah, which would make it a Sefer Torah apostle, he assured them that the Sefer Torah contained more than that, meaning that nothing is missing from the Sefer Torah. It's a kosher Sefer Torah. It'd be very hard to hear that in the most halaga place in the world that the Sefer Torah would be possible. Then he recited from memory the parasha of Be'asar LaChodesh, which is in Sefer Bamidbar, which describes the karbanos that were brought on Yom Kippur, which is in Parashas Pinchas. There was not enough time to be goyel of the Sefer Torah to the third parasha, which is at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, and it was not an option to take out a new Sefer Torah because it was already rolled. Because it was already rolled to the right place, because it might give the impression that the first Sefer Torah was puzzle. So the Kohen Gadol recited the third parasha Bal Peh. Mavarich Aleh Shmeina brachas, and he recites 8 brachas by the Kriyas HaTorah, Al HaTorah. He said the bracha that one says in shul after each aliyah of Kriyas HaTorah, Shenasa Lanu Teras Emes. Before he began reading, he said Asher Bacha Bonim Mikol Amim, which we say at the beginning of aliyah. V'alo Avoida. He also made another bracha for the Avoida in the Beis Hamikdash, which began Ritzei Hashem Elokeinu Ba'amcha Yisrael V'Sirtza HaAvoida B'Dvir Beisecha. Be pleased. He's asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be pleased with your nation, Klal Yisrael. May you be pleased with the service in the Kodesh HaKadoshim of your house. It's not Lidvir Beisecha, but it's Bidvir Beisecha, because they're actively doing the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash right now. And it ends off, Sha'oischa Levadcha B'Yora Navoid, which we say on Yom Tovim, in Musaf, before Birkas Kehanim. V'aloidah, the Thanksgiving bracha, which is the same as the bracha we say every day in Shemoneh Esrei Moedim Menach V'lach, which would follow how we do it also. When we say Sha'oischa Levadcha B'Yora Navoid and Musaf, we go straight into Moedim. Mechilas ha'avan, the forgiveness of sin. This is another one of the brachas of the daily Shemoneh Esrei, Slach Lanu. Which is interesting. He says Slach Lanu after Moedim, if we're going in order over here. And he also recites a bracha for the Beis HaMikdash separately. He davened that the Shechina should continue to reside in the Beis HaMikdash, and the bracha ended off Sheikhin B'Tzion, who dwells in Tzion, which is the Beis HaMikdash. Val Yisrael b'fnei atzman, Val Kehanim b'fnei atzman, Val Shara Tefillah. Some have the gears over here, Val Yerushalayim b'fnei atzman over here as well. So Val Yisrael b'fnei atzman for Klal Yisrael separately, which means the Mishnah teaches that this bracha and the next two were said separately, since these brachas are not familiar, not part of the daily Shemoneh Esrei. The Mishnah notes that each was a separate bracha, not combined with any others. So there's a shaila in the girsa of Val Yerushalayim b'fnei atzman, which doesn't appear in most nuschos. It's clear from the Mishnah itself that there's no such bracha, because the Mishnah says that there are 8 brachas, and this would be a 9th. So I'll go upon him. There's no bracha for Yerushalayim, but there was a mikdash b'fnei atzman, Val Yisrael b'fnei atzman. What's the bracha for Yisrael b'fnei atzman? So he davened for the geula of Klal Yisrael, and that they should remain under a Yiddish king, that the malchus of Klal Yisrael shall last. And the bracha concluded Habocher ba'amar Yisrael, who chooses his people Klal Yisrael. Val Kehanim b'fnei atzman, for the Kehanim separately. He davened that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should continue to bless the Kehanim and accept their karbanos, which ended Asher Bacha B'Zara Shel Aaron. We don't say these brachas at any other time besides for the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur. Val Shara Tefillah, and for the rest of the prayer. What does that mean? This was a tefillah, bakasha, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu save each yid from his own troubles, and it ended off Shemei Tefillah. The Gemara explains, Tchina Rina Bakasha Mulfanecha Sha'amecha Yisrael Shrichel Nivosha, that every single yid has his needs and his wants and zachin that he needs, and zachin that he's going to daven for, and these tefillahs should be answered Baruch Atah Hashem Shemei Tefillah, like a more of a general bracha to help Klal Yisrael with their personal, each one with their personal bakashas and issues. Mishnah Beis, Haraya Kohen Gadol, person who sees the Kohen Gadol, Kishu Kairei, one who saw the Kohen Gadol when he was landing from the Sefer Torah, Ein Haraya Par V'Sar HaNisrafim, he didn't see the bull and the sar when they were being burnt. Haraya Par V'Sar HaNisrafim, Ein Haraya Kohen Gadol Kishu Kairei. And the one who saw the bull and the goat when they were being burnt didn't see the Kohen Gadol when he was landing from the Sefer Torah. Not because one wasn't allowed to see both activities. It could have been thought that leaving the scene of one activity to watch the other is forbidden, because of the rule that when a person is given the chance to do one mitzvah, he may not abandon it to perform another mitzvah. In Mavirin ala mitzvahs. Watching a mitzvah in itself is a mitzvah of sorts, because the more people that gather for the Avoida, the greater Kvayt Shemayim, it is, like the Pasuk says, B'Ravam Hadras Melech, with a great number of people is the glory of the king. The Mishnah teaches here that the rule cited above applies only where one is actually performing a mitzvah, not merely watching it. But the reason why that he wasn't able to is because there was a great distance between the place where the Kriyas HaTorah was and the place where the Par Besar were being burnt, which is outside of Yerushalayim. Kriyas HaTorah was taking place in Ezras Doshim in the Beis HaMikdash, and both activities, both avodas, were being performed at the same time, so it wasn't shaykh to see both of them. Okay, Mishnah Gimel. If the Kohen Gadol read the Sefer Torah, length from the Sefer Torah, dressed in Bigdei Lavan, he goes ahead like this: Kiddush Yodav V'Raglav. After Kriyas HaTorah, he mekadosh his hands and feet in the kiyar, Pashat Yard V'Taval. He removes the white begadim, goes down into the mikvah, his tavel, olive and stapa comes up from the mikvah, and dried himself off. They bring him the 8 begadim, the shmona begadim, the golden begadim. He puts them on. And he's mekadosh his hands and feet again in the kiyar. The Mishnah mentioned that it refers to a Kohen Gadol was chosen to lay in the Sefer Torah when he's still dressed in Bigdei Lava. Since he is now removing the Bigdei Lava, he must wash his hands and feet. Had he chosen to wear his personal begadim, he would have already washed his hands and feet when he removed the Bigdei Lava. And in that case, it wouldn't be necessary to wash after laning. Rather, he would proceed directly to removing his clothing and being tovel in the mikveh. The last few prakim from Parak and Gimel till now discuss the avodah involving the Kohen Gadol's par, the Sar Lashem, and the Sar Lazazel. However, there are 2 other groups of karbanos related to Yom Kippur: the par Kohen Gadol and the par Ha'am, both of which were karbanos Oila, and the Mosuf of Yom Kippur, which consisted of 3 types of animals: a bull for an Oila, 7 sheep for an Oila, and a Sar Lachatos, which was a Chatos Chitzonis. The Mishnah will first state that the 2 Elam, the 2 rams, were offered at this point in the Avodah, and then we'll bring a machlekes about when the Karbanos Musaf were brought. He went out from where? He went out, he left the Azara, where he had washed his hands and feet, and went to the northern section of the Azara, where he shechted these rams. And he performed the Avodah of his ram and the ram of the people. And later, when the Tamar Shal Ben Arbaim was brought, he also brought Shiva Kvasim B'nei Shana Tmimim that were in their first year of life, as well as the other animals of the Musaf, the Par, and the Sar of Rebbe Lezer, Zizek Rebbe Lezer. After bringing the 2 Elam, the Kohen Gadol burnt the parts of the Par and the Sar Lashem on the Mizbeach. He was then tovel a 4th time, put on Bigdei Lavan, went back into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and took out the ladle and the shovel. He was tovel a 5th time, and then put on his Bigdei, the Shemona begadim, the Bigdei Zav. According to Belezer, it was then that he offered all the Karbanos Musaf, and then they were followed by the Tamid Shalbein Harbayim. Okay. Rabbi Kiva says, Tamid Shal Shachar Yukreven Upar Ha'oila. The 7 sheep of the Musaf were brought with the carbon Tamid Shal Shachar, as was the par for the Musafin, which was an Oila. B'sar Hanasa B'chutz Hayukreven Tamid Shal Ben Rabbayim. And the Sar Hanasa B'chutz, the goat for the carbon Musaf, which was done outside, which was the Chatas Chitzayna, was brought with the Tamid Shal Ben Rabbayim. What's this? This lashon is not meant to be precise. Rabbi Kiva actually holds that the sar of the musaf was offered immediately after the tefillah that was described in the Mishnah, the 3rd tefillah of the day, before the 2 elam were shechted. When he said that the sar for the musafir was brought in together with the Talmud Shal Ben Rabbayim after the 5th tefillah, he means that unlike the par and the shiva kvasim, which were brought with the Talmud Shal Shachar, the sar was not brought then. Bekitzer, what do we have here in the Mishnah? The Karbanos Musaf that were brought when the Kohen Gadol was wearing the Shemona Begadim, he wore those 3 separate times during the day. When he brought the Tamid Shal Shachar, when he brought the 2 Elim, and when he brought the Tamid Shal Ben Rabbayim. Rabbi Lezer holds that the entire Musaf, the Par, the Shiva Kvasim, and the Sar were brought during the 3rd session, before the Talmud Shal Ben Arbaim. Rabbi Kiva holds that part of the Musaf, the bull and the 7 sheep, were brought during the first session after the Talmud Shal Shachar, and the other part were brought during the second session before the 2 Elim. And we discussed all the karbanos and all the avodas. We were masbeh them, and we explained them throughout the Masechta, and also be'ikr in the Hakdama to the Masechta. Okay, Mishnah Dalid, Kiddush Yodav V'Raglav. The previous Mishnah stated that the Kohen Gadol was table for the third time, put on the big day zahav, and that was mark of the Eloi Ve'el Ha'am, not Paraham that I said before is a mistake. It was Eloi Ve'el Ha'am. Kiddush Yodav V'Raglav is Mekadesh's hands and feet by washing them in the Kiyar, Parshat Yar the Taval. He removed the big day zahav, went down to the mikveh, was table. All of Anastapa came from the mikveh and dried himself off. Hevila big day laman v'lavash. They brought him the white begodim again. Those were the white begodim that he wore in the morning, but not as expensive as we spoke in Paragimel. B'kiddush Yodav V'Raglav is Mekadosh his hands and feet again. Nichnas lahoitzis hakafes hamachta. He entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim to remove the kaf and the machta, the ladle and the shovel that he had left here earlier. When the Kohen Gadol entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim for the first time, he brought a ladle filled with ketores and a shovel filled with coals. He poured the ketores onto the coals, waited until the entire room filled with smoke, and then left the Kodesh HaKadoshim, leaving the kalim of the ladle and the shovel behind. The Mishnah teaches that he went back into the Kodesh HaKadoshim to remove these kaf and machta. After the fourth time he was tovel. This was the only activity that he did in the Big Day Lavan between the fourth and the fifth tefillah. In total, the Kohen Gadol entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim 4 times. Number 1, to burn the ketores. Number 2, to be zerik the dam of the part. And number 3, to be zerik the dam of the Sar Lashem. And number 4, to remove the ladle and the shovel. Kiddush Yodav V'Raglav is Mekadesh's hands and feet in the Kiyar. This is the 5th time he was tovel. Parshat Yard the Taval. He removed his white begod and went down to the mikveh and was tovel. Olav and Astapa came up from the mikveh and dried himself off. Avila big days of lavash. They burned him the golden begodim and put them on. Kiddush Yodav V'Raglav. Mekadesh's hands and feet. V'nichnas lakter ketores shal ben arbaim. He entered the kodesh to burn the afternoon ketores that he had done. He burned the ketores in the mizbeach zahav as he did in the morning. Those are the regular hakravas ketores that was burned every day of the year. Although the Mishnah doesn't mention it, he was makriv the Talmud Shal Ben Arbaim before he burned the ketores. That just means that this is the avodah of what he had to do for the ketores for the afternoon. And to fix the lamps of the menorah, which was what had to be done every day. The Kiddush Yodav V'Raglav Parshat, his Mekadesh's hands and feet removed the big day zahav. This was the 10th and the last time that he washed his hands and feet. He washed once after the first tefillah, once before and after each of the next 4 tefillahs, and now for the 10th time before removing the big day zahav. Hevila big day atzmai v'lavash, should burn him his own personal clothing and put them on. The people escorted him until he reached his house. He made a feast of celebration for his friends after Yom Kippur, when it was known that he had successfully completed the avodas and emerged safely from the kodesh. The Torah warns that a Kohen Gadol who's nichnash l'fnei without doing the avodah properly will lose his life. So when the Kohen Gadol successfully performed the entire service without any incident, it was the cause for personal celebration among another more basic reason, another also basic reason would be because the Gvaldi Simcha that he had for the Kaparas Havainis for Klal Yisrael, which was so important. Mishnah Hey, Kohen Gadol Meshamish Shmona Kelim. The Kohen Gadol serves in the Beis HaMikdash wearing 8 begodim, a hedit barba, and a Kohen hedit wears 4 begodim. Kseinas, Nechlasayim, it's nefes the avnet. The regular Kohen, the Kohen hedit, wears a kseinas, which is a long shirt, a tunic. It went from the Kohen's neck to just above his heels, with sleeves that reach the palms of his hand. The Mechnasayim are trousers. The trousers went from above from a little bit above the waist down to his knees. A mitznefes and an avnet. The mitznefes is a hat, a turban, and the avnet is a belt. The Kohen Gadol added the following 4 begodim to those worn by Kohen Hedit. He wore a chayshin, which was a breastplate. The chayshin was a cloth folded in 2 that the Kohen Gadol wore on his chest, being held in place there by the shoulder straps of the ephod. The 12 precious stones were attached to its visible side, on which the names of the shvatim were engraved, 1 shevet on each stone, as well as the names of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the word Shiftei Ka. Also, he wore the ephod. The ephod was the apron-like garment that went behind the Kohen Gadol's belt in front of him. It covered his lower back and the back of his legs down to his heels, and it wrapped around him to cover him partially in front. 2 straps were attached to the belt in the back that went up his back and over his shoulders. There were precious stones attached to each strap at the shoulder, in which the names of the 12 Shvatim were engraved, 6 on one stone and 6 on the other. Then you also have the me'il, which was a robe. It was a long robe that the Kohen Gadol wore on top of the standard Ksainis and Avnate. 72 pomegranates, which were balls of colored wool. They resembled pomegranates, and 72 bells hung along the hem of the me'il, alternating one with the other, and the me'il was worn under the ephod. And the tzitz, which was a head plate, was a gold plate that the Kohen Gadol wore on his forehead, with the word Kodesh Lashem on it. It was held in place by strings tied behind his head. The Kohen Gadol had to wear the 8 begadim, not only when serving in the Beis HaMikdash, but also when fulfilling another function. This function involved the Urim V'Tumim, which was a piece of parchment inserted in the folded Achoshen, in which the Shem HaMefarish was written. Through the Urim V'Tumim, Kadosh Baruch Hu would give answers to questions of national importance. Be'elu nishalom b'Urim V'Tumim, ve'ein nishalom el HaMelech u'lebezdin u'lemisha tzibur tzarech bay. When he was dressed in these begadim, the Urim V'Tumim could be consulted. When the Urim V'Tumim were in place, the leaders of the Jewish people could receive answers from Hashem to important questions affecting the nation. The questioner faced the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol faced the Aron. After the questioner asked his question in a low voice, some of the letters engraved on the stones of the Achoshen protruded. The Achoshen's letters included the entire Aleph base, and with the help of Ruach HaKodesh, the Kohen Gadol arranged the protruding letters so that they provided an answer to the question. And we know what happened with Eli when Chana was muspalel. It says Eli read the words Shikaira, and really it was Kshera. And, we know what that story was, which Hashem will discuss. The only people that may consult the Urim V'Tumim is a question from a king, or from the Bezdin HaGadol, or somebody needed by the public, such as the Kohen HaMashuach, who led the people in battle. A Kohen was appointed to address the army before they went into battle. Since he, like the king and the Sanhedrin, had to make decisions that affected the entire Jewish people, he had to receive guidance from the Urim V'Tumim. Ad kan.